Good day, everyone. I'm your moderator, Lee Judge, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Visual IVR, brought to you by Jacada. As a note to remind you that to honor the privacy of our attendees, only your name will appear in the attendee window. Our panelists today are Martin Hill Wilson, founder of Brain Food Consulting, CMO of Jacada, Chris DeToy, Dylan Mills, our product manager. Today we will be answering many of the Visual IVR questions that you've already submitted during the webinar registration, as well as those that come in during the webinar in the Q&A window today. We're really excited to have this open format webinar today because the questions were submitted by you, those interested in getting ahead of the digital customer service experience. So let's begin. Chris, I'll hand it over to you, and the webinar is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Lee, for setting all this up. As many of you have noticed, we are trying a different format, and we have video of all of us here, including Martin in the UK. So it should be an interesting format, and we look forward to sharing this with you today. As Lee mentioned, we got a number of questions. In fact, the participation rate was overwhelming. It was great that we got so many questions coming in. Please keep asking questions during the webinar as well, because we'll address those as well. So this webinar, we want to focus really exclusively on your questions. There were just a few questions of people kind of asking what Visual IVR is. So we will spend just 2 minutes talking about what Visual IVR is so we all understand the same thing, and then put the questions in context to that. And fundamentally, the concept of Visual IVR is much like the name describes. It's taking your voice IVR, push 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, etc., and converting that and projecting a digital or visual version of that IVR instead, because now your customers can actually touch their way through the IVR. They see the options on their smartphone, and it's much easier navigation than listening to audio prompts. And I think what's important to realize is not only is it a visual version of your IVR, what you've really accomplished is you've taken a voice caller, somebody phoning in on your voice channel, and you've really pivoted them into a digital channel. And this allows you to bring all your digital assets in front of those voice callers now. So I can show you, your bill statement. You can have options to dispute a bill, watch troubleshooting video guides, your FAQs, all those rich assets you've already produced, now available for your voice callers. And at any time, if this caller still needs service or help from an agent, they're able to seamlessly transition into an agent-assisted experience, and that agent has full continuity, and they see everything that that Visual IVR user has done up to that point of needing to speak to an agent. Once they do speak to an agent, of course, there's full collaboration as well. So while talking on the voice channel, we can continue to collaborate digitally, meaning I can send you documents, PDFs, links to important pages, everything you might need to successfully conclude that call. The benefits that we see with Visual IVR deployments, of course, the primary benefit here is increased self-service. If we can actually get your voice callers into a digital experience, we see dramatic improvement in self-service. There's no more zeroing out or just abandoning that session, and we see great containment rates there. The average handle time reduction is still important as well. For those calls that do come into the contact center, they start off warm. The agent knows everything they've done. They understand the customer intent, and you're not re-authenticating that user. So the call times are inherently reduced as well for those that still need assisted service. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that on the actual Visual IVR. I know you all dialed in specifically for the questions, so I think we'll get started with that. I believe Lee will ask us the questions, and we'll be rotating through the panel.
Okay, great. I see we already have some questions coming in, and that's wonderful. I'm going to ask the questions that we have already submitted to us, so we'll give those questions some priority since they came in during registration. But as we go through, I'll read these questions to you guys and let you take a peek at which ones you want to answer. The first question we have here says, if I have an existing IVR with self-service capabilities, is your product complementary or a replacement?
So I'll take this first one. That's actually a very good question, and one that we receive quite often. And something to keep in mind or to remember is the fact that Visual IVR is not mandatory for all customers. So we offer the customer at the very beginning of the call, before they reach the voice IVR system, the ability to opt in to the Visual IVR experience. So the customer at that point has the option to either continue along the path that they already started and go into the voice IVR system, or alternatively opt into the Visual IVR experience. So in that regard, the solution is very much complementary to any sort of IVR system that you currently have in place.
Okay, great. Let's go on to the next question here. Let's see, several here. You want to take one of those at a time, or?
Yeah, no, I think we group these together because they're all kind of related. So let me take this one, if that's okay. The question is, really regarding implementation of Visual IVR, whether it works with your existing telephony system, how long does it take, how is it typically implemented? A couple of broad questions there, but let me take a shot at that. First, I think as Dylan alluded to the previous one, Visual IVR absolutely works with your existing telephony system, your CTI, your IVR. We don't anticipate coming in and replacing. It's not a rip and replace. It's working with what you already have. So it absolutely works with your existing telephony. In terms of how long it takes to implement, of course, the million-dollar question, right? It depends what you're trying to do, of course, but there's a couple of approaches you can take. The easiest approach, or the quickest approach, is actually mirroring your existing voice IVR into a visual experience, and that's really quick. You're talking about a couple of weeks to really get your voice IVR visually enabled. From there, what we recommend is actually creating even better self-service flows so that you can truly drive down the call volume and improve the self-service, because your voice IVR was just never meant for this digital form factor. So things like accepting alphanumeric data or being able to take photographs, a much richer interface is present on the mobile device. So certainly after you've done a one-for-one visualization, you can then improve that and add self-service flows. To give you a ballpark, I would say, quote-unquote, most of our implementations are around the 2.5 months to get a full-featured Visual IVR implementation up and running.
All right, let's go on to our next question here. The next one says, what is different about customer service over mobile?
Yeah, let me chip in on that one. I think that's a growth opportunity for many organizations, simply because customers are obviously more likely to be using smartphones today. And I don't know that necessarily people have thought enough about that. For example, you've got the form factor issue, the difference between the size of a smartphone versus the size of a desktop screen and how much information you can easily visually display on that. And again, in a self-service context, how does that change the way in which you're presenting that material? I also think you've got the behavior that comes with that, and again, that kind of digital customer mindset that expects very low effort, instant response, is all driving us towards a certain way of presenting that information. And back to the topic that we're discussing today, I think that one of the great things that IVR, Visual IVR, allows us to do is to provide a very clear hand-holding experience to the customer, directing them to where the asset that they require sits. I mean, one of the big problems in self-service is the fact that most people can't discover it, even if you've created it. And so we need a bridge between what we've got and what people are looking for. And Visual IVR is a very effective way in which that can be created. So I think in summary, it's all about matching an expectation, which is all about very low effort, very instant response, and also providing flexibility, because sometimes, although we have a tendency to want to be self-serving, when we want to speak to people, we also want to have an easy path to be able to escalate that back to a human.
Excellent, excellent. Let's go on to giving other.
I was going to say, Lee, the chat came, I'm looking at the chat window, and there's one that might make sense answering right now. It came in from Wendy, asking if this solution only works for customers that are dialing from a mobile device or mobile app, because they have an internal help desk and they might be dialing from office phones. So I'd like to address that one now, because it does sort of help the conversation today. The idea is that when someone calls in, we will do a lookup. It's called a carrier lookup, but we will try and determine what kind of device they are phoning from. If they're phoning from a landline or desk phone, they're not even offered a Visual IVR session. So they only offered it for a mobile caller. So only your mobile users will experience Visual IVR or have the option to experience it. And Visual IVR can also be deployed to your website. So, instead of having just a phone number on your website, you can replace that with a Contact Us button. And once you click that Contact Us button, Visual IVR can start right there on your website. But for Wendy, no, your desk phone users just won't get that actual option. All right, Lee, we can proceed to the next.
Okay, let's see the next question we have here. Can customers route to an agent fully verified via Visual IVR?
So I'll take this one, and the way that this one is worded, I assume we're talking about authenticating the customer or identifying who the customer is before they get to an agent. The simple answer to this question is yes. Visual IVR can definitely take care of that. We can definitely authenticate the customer, identify who the customer is through Visual IVR. But to expand upon that a little bit, Visual IVR actually introduces additional capabilities to perform that authentication. So if you think about your traditional voice IVR system, you're really limited to the touch tone or voice features that have been implemented. So generally, customers coming in through a regular IVR system, a phone IVR system, need to know details like their account number, details that often aren't on the top of their head. So a lot of times when coming in through a regular IVR system, a lot of customers, many of them in fact, often skip this important step. So that puts the burden on the agent to then authenticate the customer, to spend the time identifying the customer, identifying the problem, which adds to the overall call length. So with Visual IVR, we implement alternative ways that a customer can authenticate by utilizing the screen, the mobile device. So the customer can input their email address, their actual home address, many other additional means of authenticating themselves before they reach the agent, which improves the experience overall.
All right. Okay, we have several questions. So I guess these questions are somewhat similar. So I'll go through a couple of them, and then I guess, Chris, you want to answer them. So some of the questions are, what number can I call to experience Visual IVR, and what are my expectations in terms of metric improvements, conversion rate, what is the best-in-class containment rate for Visual IVR, and the material gain that you would see with Visual IVR?
Yeah, so some great questions, basically asking, so what am I going to get for this, right? What kind of containment am I going to see? So the best way to think of a Visual IVR implementation is almost like a funnel. And, obviously what comes out at the bottom of the funnel in terms of call containment is a factor of what goes in at the top of the funnel. And what I mean by that is we can only offer Visual IVR to the mobile callers. So you're looking at about 60 to 70%, depending on your territory and demographic, of callers phoning in from mobile devices. Of those, we see about 50% of people being offered Visual IVR are actually opting in to have that visual experience. It's really pretty amazing, given it's a fairly new concept, that you're getting a 50% opt-in there of people saying, yeah, I want to self-serve digitally or visually. From there, the call containment is really impressive. So of those 50% coming in and saying, yeah, I want to try Visual IVR, we see call containment in the 70–80% range. So this means that people are very easily or successfully being able to self-serve. We have, of course, different case studies we can share with anybody who's interested, but roughly about 70–80% containment of those people coming into a visual session. So just intuitively, I think people are more comfortable with that digital medium, and because of the richer interface, like Dylan mentioned, and typing emails and alphanumerics, etc., it's just a far easier way to self-serve than touch tone or 0 through 9 keys. In terms of the top question, there was what number can I call to experience Visual IVR? I guess at the end of this presentation, Lee, we can just share that there is a website with a demo center that you can go to and actually try it out for yourself on your phone. Because one of the key things here is that there's no app needed. You don't need to install anything, and I think we'll cover that probably later as well, but you can just dial in from your smartphone and experience that. So we'll share that one with you just at the end of this webinar.
Okay, great. Good questions coming in. Still have many coming in the Q&A window as well as the ones we already have, so I'm going to keep rolling. The next question says, how should you marry digital and human self-service and live assistance?
Okay, I'm going to grab that one. That's my my home turf, that one. Good question. I think one of the things that we're seeing these days for the first time is the fact that a certain amount of digital transformation has automated everything. You know, and we're now in a world where potentially we can get an awful lot of things done without needing to use people. And that does potentially make people look at contact centers and go, is this the end of live assistance? And I think that anybody that's thinking that right now is going to be in for a surprise. I think where we are moving to is seeing a world in which we're offering probably self-service as a preferred option for people. And it's incredible in today's world how much we can do in terms of education, in terms of information, and also task completion in a completely self-contained way. However, there are going to be certain situations which are always going to get people instinctively to gravitate towards wanting another person. And I think the three use cases where that's going to be important are, number one, if a situation gets emotional. And that can either be very positive or negative. For example, you might be doing financing for a house. Now, that's a very positive experience, but on the other hand, you're nervous. You're probably going to be spending more money than you would normally do. You may well want the reassurance of a human being involved in that kind of activity. The other one is it might be negative. You might be really desperately upset with the situation that the organization has caused you, and as a result, again, you want to speak to somebody. The other situation that I think compels people is the fact that they just don't know what they're doing. They might not experience themselves as being particularly expert at what they're trying to do. The situation they're in is quite difficult and complex, and therefore, again, the natural situation is that we're going to gravitate towards people. And maybe the last situation, in addition to emotion and complex, is relationship building. And I think that's not necessarily something the customer is going to gravitate towards, but the brand may well say, hey, you know, we have an opportunity for renewing a customer relationship at the end of a cycle, like an insurance customer. We want to be investing some human capital at this particular point and building something that means they're going to stay with us. So I think in those three situations, emotion, complexity, and relationship building, then we want to be inserting live assistance as and when required. So omnichannel design these days, interestingly, has flipped from it was always human, and then occasionally we had to go at self-service, to now being in a situation where probably for the majority of time, we're trying to drive people to greater service adoption in a self-service way. And there are certain situations where it needs to be live, and there will also be certain situations where, by the way, outside of any planning, that person just wants to speak to another person. And so again, for any self-service context, we need to create easy escalation paths back to live. But that essentially is how, in design terms, you think about marrying up those two worlds. Those are the use cases for it.
Okay, excellent.
Can you go back to the chat window there? Yeah, so some great questions in almost 90 participants here so far already, so just questions keep coming in, which is great. I wanted to address this one from Mika because it was related to the adoption and metrics from earlier. Mika asked about whether we have adoption rates by demographics, you know, ages 18 to 25, 26 to 40, etc., and what reports are available to assess menu usage so we can further optimize the flow. So we do have adoption rates by demographics. Unfortunately, I don't have those with me here, but certainly we can follow up with you to give you at least what our customers are reporting back to us. Do want to address the reporting and the optimization. So it's absolutely key, and we produce what we call a heat map report, and kind of as the name implies, you're going to see exactly where your customers are going through the call tree where they're escalating to assisted service, where they are abandoning, where they might be going back and forth a couple of times, which could be a point of frustration or something that needs to be optimized. So you see this graphically. You can make optimizations and fine-tune it, publish it basically live, and then come back 24, 48 hours and see if you've managed to improve that bottleneck or reduce the number of escalations. So from my point of view, I think that optimization is kind of a continuous improvement process. You want to keep optimizing and looking at those heat maps and keep optimizing and keep into that loop. So good.
All right.
So we go to the
next question. Let's see the next one.
Yeah, this is it.
Yep. Okay. Question coming from Chad. We already have a mobile app, so how is Visual IVR different?
So again, that's another question that we often receive. And in all honesty, if we compared functionality and use cases that you can implement in a mobile app and versus Visual IVR, there isn't much of a difference. The difference does come in where we talk about adoption of these resources. So generally, and what we've seen with many of our customers is mobile adoption has grown over time, but it's still not where we want it to be. It's not all of our customers are using mobile apps, and that results in customers still phoning, still calling an organization when they need to do simple tasks that could potentially be completed through a mobile app. So in that regard, the difference is Visual IVR is at that point in time contextually offered to the customer as a potential route to self-service their inquiry at the time that they call, at the time that they phone the organization. And we're able to pivot them or transition them into that mobile app-like experience very easily without the customer having to download any application, so that they can, or so that they're aware that option is there, so that they can go down that route if they so choose. So really, when we're looking at the differences between the mobile app and Visual IVR, it really has to do with the way customers use the technology and how they get to that technology and that ability to self-service their needs.
So David,
go ahead.
Sorry, I would have thought the main thing here is not a comparison of functionality, as you're saying. It's to do with adoption, and you're always going to have many more people who don't want to download an app. It's not, they have 4 or 5 maybe that they use regularly, but they don't think about using that. And so from the point of view of Chad's question, probably you're going to have greater participation across more of your customers if you offer Visual IVR in addition to simply offering the app.
Absolutely. Yep, that is absolutely correct, and that is what we see in our implementations. Is some of our customers do have a fully fledged mobile application that they've developed many great self-service capabilities into, but they're just not getting the amount of people to utilize it due to the barriers that we discussed.
That's what I wanted to ask too. For those, I know we have examples of companies who already have mobile apps and they've added Visual IVR functionality beyond from within the mobile app. Doesn't that happen as well?
It does, yep. Thinking about that additional functionality.
Yeah, both the functionality, and I think we had another question related coming up here, but what's interesting is Visual IVR is actually driving additional downloads of that mobile app as well. So, people, as they get more familiar with the digital experience, they're more apt to now actually go download the mobile app. So definitely 2 very complementary solutions, actually.
Okay, it's a good transition into this question. Says, can Visual IVR, Martin? Did you have a comment?
No.
Yes, we hear you.
I hadn't got anything to say. I was just agreeing with the trend of where we're going to have a conversation. So please proceed, Lee.
Okay. So yeah, the next question kind of it's a good transition. It says, can Visual IVR also be integrated with current online and mobile solutions? If yes, what are the advantages? And a accompanying question is, please explain how the solution supports other digital channels such as Line, Facebook, WeChat, etc.
Right. Yeah, actually, that does tie in pretty well to the previous question. There's two aspects of this, right? One is the point at which Visual IVR is invoked by a consumer, and that can be, as we've seen on the voice channel, where the IVR offers you a Visual IVR session. It can also be on your website. So in terms of when you talk here about online solutions, you can replace the phone number with a contact us button. So when somebody comes to your website, and we know this happens often, right? I'm guilty of this. I go to your website only to find your phone number. And so what you can do there is put a contact us button, which actually starts a Visual IVR session right then and there, which can drive me through a certain self-help kind of menu, and then if necessary, still give me a phone number at the end of that where I need to talk for assisted service. Likewise, it can be built into your mobile app as well. So if you want to offer that seamless connectivity from the mobile app to the contact center and bridge that disconnect, Visual IVR actually allows you to do that. The other aspect of this, of course, is the ability to integrate that link not just to your website, but there's no reason that you cannot put it in your social media channels, in your chat. We see this whole trend of conversational commerce, which are using things like WeChat to provide that interface to everybody. So yeah, absolutely, it's used. It's technology-wise, it's HTML5. So pretty easy to integrate with really all your different online and mobile solutions that you have in place today.
Well, the next question is, will Visual IVR save you from coffee spills? No. No, it will not.
I was hoping that wasn't apparent on the video.
Okay, let's go back to what Visual IVR will do. What do you think of the shift in customer engagement to social media channels from the more traditional contact methods?
Okay, well, again, that's a good topic from my perspective to have a crack at. I just think that that's indicative, again, of the mindset that I was discussing earlier, and that is that I will do, from my perspective as the customer, I'll find the path of least resistance. I think that's what it comes down to. There are many, many people who have horror stories about sitting in queues for contact centers, not getting good service even when they've waited maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And again, I just expect for you to catch the ball and deal with my problem. And I think Twitter in particular exemplifies the fact that I just want to reach out. I want you to deal with it in a very simple, low effort, real-time kind of a way. And for better or for worse, certainly social channels have developed a reputation for being a place where you can get stuff fixed in a way that you can't in more traditional customer service. And I know from doing quite a lot of training myself in those teams that they are more empowered than the typical voice team. Now, it doesn't actually make sense that we've done that, but maybe the fact that they are more public, as they say famously, in fact, this will work very well in this context, nobody can hear you scream in the IVR. And that is one of the things that is attractive to people about social, that I can actually escalate my problem in a way that maybe you're going to spend a little bit more attention and a little bit more urgency getting stuff fixed. And so therefore I have learned behaviorally to do that. I think the other thing, by the way, is although you might say that a messaging platform such as Messenger, WeChat, etc., strictly speaking isn't social because it reverts back to being a private form of communication, nonetheless, it's now being grouped into social customer service. And again, back to a previous question where we were talking about apps, it's interesting that there is an emerging argument that messaging is not just an application, it's a whole platform. And particularly if you see the way in which WeChat has developed out a whole ecosystem, then we're beginning to see again a new, very strong set of behaviors from customers, which is spending time on those messaging platforms and doing pretty much everything that they're doing. And certainly the stats coming out of WeChat are very, very powerful. I think they've got an average revenue per customer of $7. I think the Western equivalent platforms are still only about 70 cents. So interestingly, the channel upon which you buy stuff is also typically the channel through which you want to be served. So we're beginning to see demand for service over Messenger, demand for service over WeChat, WhatsApp, Line, it's growing very quickly. So both the traditional service networks, social service networks, and also the newer ones, the new messaging platforms, are growing simply because that's where customers are, and they reflect an expectation that I can get instant access to service.
All right.
I'm going to grab one here from the chat window as well. Micah, thank you for correcting my pronunciation of the name there. This question actually comes from Matt, and he's asking, when the call goes to Visual IVR, does this terminate the call, or do you have speech and Visual IVR running at the same time? If so, what challenges have you found with this approach in the customer experience? So it really is the customer choice, or at least the organization's choice, whether they want to keep both channels open. Technically, you can keep both open unless you're on a CDMA network which doesn't support dual voice data, then we have to drop one. But if you're on GSM, we can keep both open. In terms of what our customers are doing, many are opting to keep both open initially just to help transition customers into this new experience, because it gives you the sense that you haven't been disconnected. And with the idea being that once customers are used to this, to then drop the voice call completely. Other customers are choosing right out of the gate to drop that voice call with a reassuring message, that they can reconnect in at any time and jump to the front of the line. So it really is up to your choice from an implementation perspective as to which one you think is going to be a better customer experience. Really, we have customers doing both, and the self-service and the opt-in rates seem to be about the same. So I'm not sure that one's necessarily better than the other approach.
Okay. And this next question we've touched on a little bit, but it's definitely worth revisiting. It's a very important part. What is the rate of customers installing Visual IVR application? How do you convince customers to install it?
Yeah, and honestly, this is a common misconception. A lot of people do look at Visual IVR as kind of another application, another app that the customer has to download. And I think as we covered, and as I'll reiterate, with Visual IVR, or at least our solution, Jacada Visual IVR, we don't require the customer to download anything. So there's no need for the customer to install an application on their device that they're connecting with you on. So just to answer the question, in short, there's no need for the customer to install an application.
All right, great. So the next question coming in from Pete says, what counsel and best practice advice do you have for changing customer mindsets around adoption and use of digital technology across insurance services?
Okay, yeah, I'll take that one. Partly related to another question you asked specifically across insurance services. Let's just talk generically first. There's a term in the industry that you may have heard and that we see being used called fostering digital habits. And this is the very crux of this problem, as Pete mentioned here around adoption, is that, on the one end of the spectrum, you've got the digital natives. These are the people that are going to self-serve at all costs on a digital channel. At the other extreme, you've got the people that are always going to call you no matter what. But there is that contingent in the middle that have a propensity to call, but may quite successfully use digital and even enjoy using digital. And we see Visual IVR really ties into that segment the best, those with a propensity to call, but can be gently transitioned into a digital experience. And that really helps them a lot. So what we see from our customers, there's some interesting kind of anecdotes really, specifically in the insurance industry and health insurance. But these people customers that are actually being transitioned into digital and having a good digital experience are more apt to next time use digital first. And in fact, the mobile team at one of our large insurance companies, customers, they told us that Visual IVR has actually driven more mobile app downloads than any other marketing channel or initiative that they've done, because I think people get a great digital experience where they might not have had that desire initially, and then are reminded to go download the mobile app, and from there on, they shift more towards the digital native side of things. So it really is about this fostering digital habits, and I think Visual IVR is a good way of starting that.
Could I just add a wee bit on that one and say I think there's three things. First and most obvious is if you're offering something new to a customer, make sure it's a better experience. It's an obvious point, but architect it from the perspective that you offer something that's a benefit and therefore an inducement to move. Second thing is educate people, because it's a surprise to people, and often people build new functionality and don't let anybody know about it, and then are disappointed. And then the third thing is make sure you signpost it. It's not at all clear if you're doing something new, how to access it and where to find it. So all of those things need to be brought together. And interestingly, in the insurance space, certainly in the UK, it remains, apart from the initial part of buying insurance through aggregating sites, very much a phone-based environment, you know, particularly during the claims process and in other incidents like that. And so therefore, interestingly, this particular technology is extremely suitable for that kind of customer who has the instinct to begin a communication with an insurance brand, you know, via a phone call, and then using Visual IVR in effect to direct them to self-service assets. So it would fit very well culturally into the UK context of insurance business. So,
excellent. Well, this next question is definitely for you, Martin. You can continue. The next question: what do you anticipate as the most significant industry change for 2018?
Well, there's loads going on. I think that's one answer. Actually, it's not a flippant one, but you know, there's tons going down. It depends which bit you want to get hold of. I think you could say, for example, we're becoming increasingly omnichannel. I know that's not a just next year job, but I think that is happening more and more. So put simply, I think the distribution between voice, text, and even video is happening more and more, as we expect. I think that we are beginning to see all things AI and intelligence assistant oriented turning up. And I think that that is something that has certainly, that's going to hit the trough of disillusionment faster than anything else, because that's a terribly spoken up topic. But I think that we're seeing that. I'm excited, you know, about another aspect of voice, which is the automated voice coming out of people like Alexa and coming out of Google Assistant. I think that that has got terrific potential. And then that's going to take us back full circle to design. You know, when do you talk? When do you tap? When do you type? And again, I think that it's a huge opportunity to design experiences that go across that in a way that makes multimodal much, much, much more powerful and much more instinctive for customers. You get that stuff right, and then people are going to move across your channels and different offerings in a much more intuitive way. So I think that all that stuff blends together, depending what industry, depending what you're trying to do with your customer base. It depends which ones of those strands you're going to pick up on most. The one thing that is definitely happening, though, is there is no status quo left in customer service.
Excellent.
Let me just quickly grab you two from the windows. Ironically, both gentlemen named Dan. We've got a Dan D and a Dan B, and two questions pretty similar. One question was, do customers use Visual IVR from an outbound perspective? And the other one was, how could we use Visual IVR to support collections within telco, mainly for suspense, disconnects, and reconnection efforts? So two very related questions, actually. So outbound is a great use case, and I'm glad the question came up, because so many times outbound is done wrong, just because outbound is a great vehicle for reducing call volume if done right. But if you don't do it right, it's just going to cause a spike in call volume as people get these outbound notifications and they want to react to the outbound notification. And that's where Visual IVR is really used, is to be able to react to that outbound notification. For example, a very large, well-known logistics company, a carrier, they are using Visual IVR in an outbound manner. If you're not home to receive your package, they know that this can very quickly translate into an inbound call. So what they do is they proactively send you an outbound notification that when you click that link, it starts a Visual IVR session right there on your mobile device saying, sorry, you were not at home when we tried to deliver your package. Please, choose a user's calendar and schedule another convenient date for redelivery. So they've managed to avoid an inbound call from some negative experience, if you will, using this outbound capability. Likewise, the question that Dan asked about collections, we do have this deployed specifically in collection agencies. Often, things related to debt collection or account disconnects, those are tough conversations to have just from a human emotion perspective. And many people actually prefer self-serving their collection issue, whether that's making a minimum payment to keep the account active or asking for an extension, whatever the business case is. People are more apt and more comfortable to self-serve in something which tends to be of a personal nature. So.
Okay. So we've discussed some use cases and answers for telecom industry, for insurance industry. So this next question, I think maybe this is for you, Dylan, ask about some use cases for financial institutions.
Yeah, great question. And just continue along with what Chris mentioned earlier. I'll start with an outbound use case for Visual IVR. So a lot of organizations, what they'll do today, as far as fraud is concerned, is they'll send customers a quick notification if a charge occurs that's not recognized by either the organization or may not be recognized by the customer. So with Visual IVR, you could actually take action upon that. So not only notify the customer of a fraudulent activity, but also allow the customer to then launch a Visual IVR interaction contextually and just verify whether or not that transaction is fraudulent. If it is, then you could take further action upon that to remediate the issue. So just a simple outbound use case for Visual IVR related to the financial institutions. But going back to what I mentioned before, as far as functionality is concerned between mobile applications and Visual IVR, there is a lot of overlapping functionality. So if you think about use cases in the financial institutions industry, we can absolutely offer all of the regular online banking type use cases, so check balance, transfer funds, pay a bill, or set up automatic payment, as well as extending upon that. We can also offer additional capabilities like the ability to exchange documents when applying for loans or credit cards or insurance. So we can add additional capabilities on top of those regular use cases that you think of related to mobile applications. As well as not only just document exchange, but you can introduce collaboration between the customer and the agent because you have this mobile digital interaction open between the customer and the agent. The two can interact in a greater way, in a more advanced way than just communicating over the phone.
All right. Did you see some questions you wanted to address from the Q&A? They're still coming in.
Actually, it's an interesting one from Benjamin, just because it ties into what Dylan was saying about the collaboration and sharing the documents. And Benjamin was asking about how much data does it take to share the documents, because users are going to want to know that they may be charged. So, it's a good point. Within the telco industry, it's relatively simple because they can make those free of any data costs. But if you're outside of that industry, we do normally give the kind of opt-in from the user that, standard data and text rates may apply. It hasn't really been an issue. These documents, if you're sharing a PDF with the latest rate plans and things, they're very small. They can be compressed and decompressed on both sides. So it's negligible, and I think most of us are sitting on fairly generous data plans in most regions. But again, we do give the customer the option of opting out or receiving data.
Okay. The next question coming in from Ivan says, are there certain complexity or price levels of the solution fitting variable sizes and complexity of company offices in various countries?
Okay. I guess Ivan's really asking. What's viable for Visual IVR, at which point is the ROI there. And ultimately, the big ROI driver behind Visual IVR is call containment. We want to reduce that flood of calls coming into the contact center. So your ROI, you're going to need enough inbound call volume that where you can save calls is actually going to result in a tangible ROI for you. So, rule of thumb, I would say typically organizations with 100+ agents in a contact center are going to get great ROI. Of course, the higher the number of agents, the better the ROI. But I would say, 100+ agents is roughly the sweet spot. There are many use cases where specialized situations we have, 20, 30 agents, but those with a complex business domain, the ROI can still be there as well.
All right, great. Let's go on to our next question. We got a few more before we wrap up, so that you return to your busy days. The next question comes from Warren. Warren asks, we are new to this technology domain. Where do you suggest we go to learn more about Visual IVR?
Well, I'd say talk to you guys.
Good answer.
So what about,
Go ahead, Martin.
Well, no. Well, one thing actually, I mean, you guys have run this, you said you were going to mention at the end of the day, but, visual-ivr.com. I'm clearly a bit of a fan of this stuff, and I do send people to the site, and I had a look at it yesterday, and it's really got some good resources there. So again, if you're in the early stages of educating other colleagues to that, I think that's a very handy little URL to push across to people and say, go and sample it, go and have a look at it, get a feel for it.
Yeah, and I will mention that there actually is a demo there where you can actually experience it on your own phone whenever you want to try it out. Let's go to the next question. I see we have two here that are similar. From Benjamin, he asked, where have you seen Visual IVR used in the digital healthcare space? Are there any best practices? And also, can you please provide an example in the B2B healthcare or pharmaceutical space where Visual IVR has been implemented from Ann?
I'll take that one, and maybe my answer might be less than completely satisfying, and with advanced apologies to Benjamin and Ann that asked these questions. We do have a healthcare practice lead who I was hoping would make a guest appearance for this webinar and specifically address these questions, and unfortunately he's on a customer site, so we'll certainly follow up with you in person on these. But I will touch upon just a couple of issues here. In terms of the digital healthcare space, we have a number of customers in the health insurance space, mostly on the payer side, not the provider side. And it's the classic use cases of trying to avoid those inbound calls due to questions that should be self-served, things such as, where is the closest doctor, plan information, explanations, things of that nature, things that can be relatively easy self-served if only people would actually use the self-service assets. So great results within that space. Ann's question on the B2B healthcare space does get a little trickier just because in a lot of B2B scenarios, you have people phoning in from landlines because they're sitting at their desk in the office phoning in from a landline or a desk phone, in which case Visual IVR isn't relevant to that percentage of callers. But certainly where you've got a complex domain, one of the ones that we do have for a large software company, it's not healthcare, but they do their product activation where IT in an organization has to phone the software company to actually activate the licenses that they've procured for their own organization. So it is B2B, and something as simple as product activation has been very successfully utilized in Visual IVR.
All right. Our next question here, I think this is a good one for you, Martin. Dan asks, what are some best practice tips for personalizing the digital customer experience?
Well, I think I'm going to strip out the digital there. I think that there's loads of opportunities that we've got, and it's all to do with really what we're leveraging around of existing knowledge of the customer. So you can go right the way back to CTI days, and whether or not we are using what we've got in CRM. Again, we don't do a good job on that. One of my soapboxes in life is the number of times I have to keep repeating to you, who I am, my requirements. You don't seem to learn over time, and yet you always ask me about that information. So to make a really obvious point, what do you already know about your customers that you're collecting as a matter of routine, and then how are you exploiting that as a matter of routine. And the personalization can manifest in a whole bunch of ways. You could, for example, and I don't know whether you can do this in Visual IVR, but certainly you ought to be able to, in traditional IVR, dynamically adjust what is presented to that user based upon their likely requirement. So if you are trying to be predictive and say, hey, someone's just bought something on a website and they then want to phone somebody in a call center, what's the likelihood that that person's going to phone them about cancelling the order, modifying the order, or checking out the delivery date? In which case, why aren't those particular options in the IVR put up front rather than getting people to go through all those particular things? So again, a point, and maybe David, you can tell us whether or not that's possible to dynamically adjust a Visual IVR menu. But there's an example of using what we know about a customer. We may well be able to anticipate customer requirements. In other words, we know all customers typically after a month of being with us and onboarded ask this type of question, in which case, why aren't we dynamically outbound messaging them about that information rather than waiting for them to come and talk to us? So I think there's a terrific scope once you start to look about using the information we've already collected to reduce effort and to give customers tighter choices and to recognize their situation without them having to tell us over and over what it's all about. So that's a place that I would recommend you start.
Did you have a comment on that, Chris?
As far as dynamically adjusting the menu options, I can say that it is absolutely possible. I probably would be able to talk very deeply into the technical details, but that is something that we definitely do. Do you want to add?
Yeah, actually, and it coincidentally kind of ties into this question. So it's actually a good segue, and we can touch upon both, because Nick is asking, they need more than 10% reductions, right? Sure, 10% reduction is nice, but what has to happen to deliver a real step change in core reduction? So a couple of points, just and when we talk about 10% reduction, we talk about 10% overall inbound call volume across your entire contact center. Within a Visual IVR flow, we're seeing 70–80% containment, so certainly much higher than that 10%. But Nick's question here, I think, is very valid. It's stepping past just Visual IVR, and what do we look at the industry as a whole? And Martin started touching on this as well. And I think from my perspective, it does come down to customer effort, right? If we want to make this big change, Martin used the term, I think he equated to electricity. Electricity takes the path of least resistance. I think customers are going to take the path of least effort, and that means personalizing interactions on the digital and the voice channel. We know as customers when we phone in how much we hate talking to an agent in a scripted conversation where they're not really listening to what we're saying, but they're just following a script blindly. And unfortunately, digital seems to be currently in that same scripted manner because we're all being forced through the same digital process, and that needs to change. They need to be personalized. If you know my intent, why are you giving me the same set of sequences that somebody else has to go through? If I'm back on your digital channel within 3 hours of my previous interaction, that should be something alerting you that probably that wasn't resolved. The voice channel is mature. They're looking at first contact resolution and things of that nature. Digital seems to be behind in this step. I don't see people really talking about first digital resolution or measuring these metrics. So I think it ties into the personalization, understanding my intent, personalizing the flow for me. Yes, within Visual IVR, of course, we will absolutely drive people down different flows. There was another question in the chat window about offering Visual IVR to one segment of customers and not another. So all of that is personalization, and it's all inherently capable to do. It's really more of it's not a technology barrier. I think it's maybe an organizational barrier where organizations need to start really looking at how they can personalize digital and measure the digital satisfaction rates.
Okay, great. Here's a question from Mark. He says, we recently launched a new telephony solution, a new customer portal, and also a CRM system. Over the next year, we'll be looking into replacing the legacy loan management system. and will continue to investigate ways of reducing volume of contacts into the business. Question or?
Yeah, so this one's not necessarily a question. I guess, and in the interest of time, I'll cover. Well, I'll just mention that this makes me have a few hopes. The first hope is that I hope, Mark, you've learned something through this webinar today, at least a little bit about Jacada Visual IVR. The second hope is that I hope you reach out to us if you want to learn more about Visual IVR. We can absolutely go into much greater detail about the solution. And then the third hope is I hope that we can provide you the benefit of solving the problem that you're currently looking to solve by reducing call volume, utilizing Jacada Visual IVR.
Okay, I'm sure you can. Let's see, we're wrapping up here. I got about a couple more questions, maybe one or two. Let's see, this question says, how does Visual IVR fit within a company's omnichannel strategy?
All right, I'll take it, but then I guess I'll pass it around maybe for the panel. I think, at least from my perspective, one of the first challenges here is to define what we mean by omnichannel. I know it's such an overused word that we don't always have a clear definition of exactly what omnichannel is, even if we are starting to all agree on what that means. So one aspect of omnichannel, of course, is that continuity as you jump from channel to channel, and Visual IVR fundamentally will carry and connect your voice and your digital sessions together, so you get that continuity. So whether I'm on a Visual IVR on the mobile or on your website and subsequently want to reach out to assisted service on the voice channel, that is a continuous interaction and the agent receives the full context. I think the other thing I'd add, a very important part of what I believe is omnichannel is the choice aspect, and we don't want to force channels on customers, and customers need to be given a choice of what they're most comfortable with, whether that's pure digital, pure voice, or maybe this kind of hybrid solution where they start on voice and we gently transition them to digital. But I think that comes down to channel choice, which is fundamentally a strong component of any omnichannel strategy. Martin or Dylan, anything you want to add to that?
I think you said it very well, that it's to do with choice. I think that in a smartphone context, touch, type, and talk, Visual IVR is the new age navigation system. It's the way in which you link all of that together in a really kind of elegant way, and it provides people with choice between self-service and live without getting lost. And so therefore it bridges a gap, and I think it's right in the center of helping people migrate from traditional service to the next phase of.
All right. Well, that concludes our webinar today. Thank you, Martin, our industry analyst, consultant expert on the line from across the pond. Thank you again. Also,
thank you very much.
To Chris and Dylan for answering so many questions that our attendees had submitted regarding Visual IVR. This concludes our webinar. Everything you want to know about Visual IVR. If there's any questions that we were unable to answer, and there are quite a few we had in the Q&A window, we'll be glad to respond to you directly after the event. We hope you've gained valuable insight into Visual IVR and how easily you can utilize it to enhance your organization's digital customer service. A replay of the event will be available soon on visual-ivr.com, along with the download link of the presentation. A reminder again, you can go to that site now, visual-ivr.com, and experience Visual IVR for yourself on your mobile device right now. So once again, thank you for attending today. And I also wanted to give a thanks to, she's trying to get out of this, to Noah. You may have seen her in our videos promoting the webinar today. I tried to convince her to come on camera, but she's resisting. So thanks again for being behind the scenes and making this all happen. Once again, thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.